So a few weeks ago I was in a conversation with a friend of mine and we were talking about what our things were. I don't just use that tactic on YouTube, I use it in real life to get to know people. Anyways, one of the things that my friend said that she was into doing was writing sonnets, which kind of threw me for a loop because that's really cool, and I've never heard anyone say that before. As you might expect, I responded, I need to read these, can I see them? And that's when she said something very interesting that kept me thinking for the rest of the week. Okay, I don't have a quote hat yet. You guys gotta help me out and suggest what I should use for quotations. Anyways, she said that when she wrote her sonnets, she would promise to herself that she would never show them to anybody, and would keep that promise in order to preserve the artistic purity of what she was doing. Despite the fact that I put a whole lot of stuff in front of other people, and especially on the internet in front of other people to check out, something about this resonated with me, and it's something that I think is worth discussing. For any long-term artistic pursuit that you're involved in, even if you intend to publish things within that pursuit, I think having this sort of bubble of unpublished, intentional, non-shared space can be really valuable to both the quality and the longevity of your artistry. Specifically, I think choosing times and places strategically where you resolve not to release what you're doing can really help you to think outside the box and also keep on rediscovering why you enjoy doing what you do. So first off, why would the unpublishable bubble help you think outside the box? To answer that question, I'm going to start with one of the things that you wrote in response to a former video of mine, Rigs, Reduxes, and Rules. In that video, I asked you to help me out in defining and figuring out what perhaps the rules of different social networks are in terms of what's good content and bad content and helpful content and spurious content. And one of you responded, not only with some excellent thoughts on the rules of YouTube, but also gave some ideas and some musings on the nature of publishing itself. So, quoting here, something that I've always found to be strange and interesting about the video aspect of YouTube is that even though you are making a personal video with your own personal thoughts, it is rarely your true self that is displayed on screen. I think this is a really interesting thought because it sums up my publishing experience, not only in video, but in virtually every form of media. And that is that art that is created for the public involves some simplification or exaggeration to some degree. I don't think this is a bad thing, but I think it is a natural tendency, and it goes back to that idea of artistic exformation. A few videos ago, I talked about artistic exformation, which was an expansion of a concept called exformation that Zay Frank covered. To some, in both art and real life, in order to express ourselves to other people, we often rely on shared common understanding that is not stated explicitly. This unspoken context is called exformation, and in art it can be very difficult because you can interpret the same exformation many different ways. Something that I didn't really mention though in that earlier video of mine was that each of us, through our experiences and through just what we like, have a really unique and distinct set of exformation that we don't really share with anyone. They're aspects and properties of things that intrigue us and cause us to have the interests that we do. On the basic level, this can impact the classes that we enjoy in school or the career that we pick. But on a deeper level, it represents a very specific psychological blueprint that we still sort of have to figure out on our own. So what does any of this have to do with the unpublished bubble? For artists, the unpublished bubble can be a sort of sandbox that lets us explore the artistic aspect of that individual exformation. It lets us explore and figure out our uniqueness without worrying about whether what we're making and what we're doing is publishable or popular or successful in the future. It's unfettered artistic exploration, and I think it's essential to figuring out who you are and where you stand in whatever art form you're involved in. Without it, we start thrashing around and sort of just copying whatever we like at any one moment a little bit too much, without really realizing why we like that. And as the years go on, we bounce from thing to thing to thing without landing on something central that can ground us. So I would argue that the unpublished bubble is essential for finding your own voice. but I think it's also important for keeping your interest in that voice. Though there's a lot of awesome stuff about creating art, there's also a whole lot of stuff that is very difficult, especially when you're creating art to release to other people. The amount of time required for practice, preparation, execution, and editing can get overwhelming after a while. And often the payoff for all that work that you do at the beginning is not very great. You aspire and you create and you love and you release, and then you create newer things and you dislike what you made before, and you are constantly sort of trying to outdo yourself or naturally sort of outdoing yourself, and it feels like a little bit like you wasted something on what you did earlier. But the point is that all these things that you do, that you spend a lot of time on, are essential stepping stones of becoming less terrible, and you have to go through them. And when you're in the thick of it, it can get very depressing at times. But the difference between it being depressing occasionally and being an unceasing burden is the perspective of why you're doing it. If you're creating for the sake of creating things, void of love of the actual thing that you're creating, then you're going to run out of steam. Because essentially then you're driven by the love of novelty, and once a new idea comes up, you're going to just abandon the old one and dive after the new one. Having this perspective is something that you tend towards. It's not necessarily something that you start with. And in that sense, it can be very dangerous. But the way that you can break out of that creating for the sake of novelty is by creating in the unpublishable bubble, where you have agreed to yourself that you are not going to publish what you create. You're not going to record it, you're not going to write it down, you're just going to play or do or think for the sake of doing it because you enjoy the activity itself and not just the performed version of it. In terms of music, applying this is pretty no-brainer and obvious. But in terms of vlogging / Twitter / public expression online or out around, I think the analog is private expression and interaction with other people, i.e. having conversations in real life, or arguably having Skype conversations with individuals. Focusing on the one-on-one aspect of communication rather than the one-to-many aspect of communication. Doing this can help keep your perspective and priorities straight, and thus help you get through the long, dull periods of monotonous work. Thus, I believe that the unpublished bubble is not only beneficial, but essential to being a creative individual. What do you think? Just for now, let's talk in public about talking in private. I'll see you downstairs. Until then, this is Jacke Karashae, wishing you a healthy, creative life.